Hello everyone, welcome back to the TFG Emporium. Hoping you guys are doing well today. I am excited to get this video up as kind of a sequel to my How to Use Monsters in the new edition of MESBG. This is the How to Fight Monsters version of it, so if you are facing monsters, some things you can do to fight them. So the last video that I did, I talked about how to use monsters, and this is going to focus on mostly strategies on combating monsters, because we went over the rules. We're going to go over the generic stuff for monsters again, just in case you haven't seen that video, and to refresh it in your mind going into this stuff, with like some TLDRs for the BPAs and stuff for the brutal power attacks. All monsters have 3 brutal power attacks they have access to. The first one is Rend, where you use the target strength instead of defense for wounding, and all the attacks must go to the same model. Replacing strikes, they're not technically strikes, so if the model is trapped, rending it, you do not get to double the dice with a rend. That is a big deal with that. Otherwise, you got Barge, which instead of making strikes, you push back all the models engaged 3 inches, and then including any makeways, you as the monster player get to control, and then get to move 3 plus D3 inches, and then can do whatever you want in that movement, including charging, running away, anything like that. But no strikes are made on the models in that fight. And then the third is Hurl, which the monster chooses a model that it is engaged with, hurls it a distance equal to D3 inches plus the difference in strengths of the monster and the hurled target. And then you will also take an intelligence check to make sure that you can throw it where you choose as the monster controller, versus if you fail it, your opponent chooses the target. But it always must be an opponent model. They can't make you throw into one of your own models. And this leads to 2 strength 6 hits on the thrown model, 1 strength 6 hit on the targeted model, and they will both go prone if either of them survives the hits. The next thing that's a big deal to know, that's just generic for all monsters, when they make a strike, if it removes a model as a casualty, if that model had a spear support, you can then make a free additional attack on the spear support. So if you have 3 attacks and you kill 3 models, if they each had a spear support, you get an additional attack on each of those. It's not tied to your actual attacks beyond them needing to do the wound. You can have as many supporting hits as there were supports on the models you killed, including if there's 2 pikes, you get to hit both pikes. Now we'll start going over some of the things that you can do to minimize the impact and the damage monsters can put out. The first one is understanding monster threat and control of the battlefield with priority versus not having priority. With choosing priority now compared to last edition, it makes the monster changes way more impactful of who has priority and who doesn't. You can and should you typically fight monsters last in a turn. It can make the need to do so earlier less helpful for the opponent. The first thing this allows is it prevents opponents from opening with barges to pile in on a target. So like if a bunch of fights are happening across the board and you have monsters in on a bunch of guys that they were able to charge on the outskirts and they weren't able to get to your hero, let's say they're able to charge some dudes. Now with priority, the monster player can do all 3 of these fights, likely win them, barge their opponent away 3 inches, roll the D3. Oh look, I'm less than 4 inches away, because a barge gives you a minimum of 4 inches. It's 4 to 6. So if your target you're wanting to barge into is within 4.1 inches, the barge is guaranteed to get into them, and then it's still really likely to get at least the 5 inches. So you can, oh, I do that fight, I barge into Bayorn. I did this fight, I am now going to barge into Bayorn. I do this fight, I'm now going to barge into Bayorn. And now with the person with priority, they don't have to risk heroic combats of spending the might to do the heroic combat and then having to actually kill the model. It's taking away all of the risk and just straight up saying, I'm going to do this fight with all my might, do the barge, do this fight, do the barge, do this fight, do the barge. Guy's now trapped, likely to lose the fight, likely to die, and all because they had priority. Because now if you don't have priority as the monster player and you as the other monster player, if these were the only 3 fights that were happening, you can do the first fight. Okay, Tom barges. Now you do Bayorn versus Tom. Whatever happens, happens. And then yes, they can keep barging into Bayorn, but you can immediately do the Bayorn fight after their barge. So he's only fighting 1 troll at a time and never trapped. So even when he loses, he's not just probably flash dying. And when he wins, he can actually probably realistically win against them because he's not fighting them all at once. In this case, against the trolls, do the Tom fight last, so he doesn't get his fight value halved. But that's a little bit different. But the strategy of piling in with barges, I have found playing monsters very, very powerful. And so very much impacts the damage that they can cause based on it. And there's different strategies the monster player can employ to counteract this specific setup. Obviously you don't want to be in this setup really ever with your hero in the center like this without more help, but just kind of a general idea of how barging with priority and controlling the order of fights really matters, and understanding that. And sometimes there might be a need to call a heroic combat with a hero that maybe normally wouldn't, just simply to get that fight to happen first. Because now in that same scenario, monsters have priority, but let's say we have Beorn is fighting a monster. These guys, their barges aren't super consistent, so we'll move them a little closer just for this example to make it be like these guys, if they have priority and they want to, they can get into Beorn very easily, like guaranteed now. So now Beorn might be like, I'm not killing this troll in one combat, but I don't want to have these guys barge into me, so I'm going to heroic combat. So then even if these two both combat, one of them, if they win the roll-off, would go first. Maybe kill their guy and then get in. He's not going to be trapped. He's only going to fight two at once. So it's still not great, but if you're going to die, spend your might to make it as hard as possible for them to flash kill you. Just a general thing. It's better to spend your might than die with might. So if you can might up a roll when you're really likely to die, or you can force a strike off when it's like, you know, I'm not even in a great position, but I can force this strike off because I've got some might left and I'm likely to die otherwise. And even though it's not in my favor, it's better to try it and spend the might than die with it. Always be looking for those situations with your heroes just in general, but especially against monsters. Because one of the reasons why, like heroic combats, like if we replaced these with just like an Aragorn on horse or a Gandalf on horse, Éomer, two Rohan heroes that have charged two guys, and then you have another guy tied up over here. The barges, if you have tied fight or lower fight, you can't react with a strike. Whereas, Éomer comes in, combats off this orc, your hero is like, cool, I'm going to strike, so that way if he combats successfully and he comes into me, I will have the fight value, we're going to be okay. Versus, we go into this, Beorn could be like, cool, I am maybe tied on fight already. If it was a Beorn on just a dude, like I'm beating him on fight, so I'm not going to strike. Why would I ever strike? But if he doesn't strike and you have priority, then you can do the barge and then go into him. So he has to preemptively call the strike without you calling anything, meaning that with you having priority, he has to, without you having called anything yet, call the strike. Which, yes, you will pass and then he will get the opportunity back, but that's where you can be like, cool, I'm not calling anything. You've literally just wasted a point of might because he called a strike that's going to cause nothing to happen for him. So barges being unreactable combats in a way is super, super potent, but you have to understand as the non-monster player, sometimes you just have to do that. There are going to be situations where your guy is in danger and will die 9 times out of 10 unless the dice just go super in your favor. And sometimes you might have to rely on that, but that's going to be the other 9 times out of 10. So like the 99 times out of 100, that's not the case. Whereas maybe 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000 games, you're like, I can't afford to call it because I need the might for this. And I just have to hope that they fluff. That situation might come up. Not likely though. So when it comes to that, you have to understand, just like when you're looking out for heroic combats, you have to have the foresight fighting against the monsters that they can barge into your hero without having to call the heroic, so you're not going to be mentally prompted to counter strike. You have to just know to do it on your own preemptively. It sometimes can lull you into a sense where you have priority, so your opponent calls first, but then they don't call anything, and you're like, cool. And sometimes you can forget, oh, they didn't call anything, I don't even want to call anything, we're all good. Or sometimes you call a combat and then reposition your hero into a point where they can get barged into. So all things you have to be careful about when it comes to basically reactable barges and their movement, of understanding how to keep a hero safe and threatening to the monsters and their troops still. Flip side of this, you also have to understand that if the monster can strike, so in the case of Bill for the trolls, or if they have the strike upgrade, if Beorn's on a dude, Bill's on a dude, Bill can barge into Beorn. Bill has the fight value. Beorn's like, cool, I'm going to strike because I don't want him to barge into me. The other advantage of barge not being heroic is Bill can go, cool, I'm going to strike as well. I'm going to see what my strike goes to. And depending on the situation, if the monster player has priority, they can go, cool, we're going to do the Beorn fight first. I get to see what your fight goes to. Whatever you roll for the D3, probably kill my guy. I now know your fight value. I'm going to do my fight, roll my strike, see if I beat you, and then I'm going to barge my guy away, and then go into Beorn, knowing that we've both struck, but my strike likely beats it, in this case with Foot Beorn. And it's just like, cool. You have the full information as the priority monster player. So in that situation, it might actually be more advantageous, you need to weigh this in your head, of not doing the Beorn fight first. Because depending on the monster's fight value, like if it's the Witch King per se, who is fight 6 just like Beorn, both fight 6, you both strike. So the Witch King, if he's striking, he's basically almost certainly going to barge in. So you can say, okay, Mr. Witch King, roll your strike. They roll less than a 5 or 6. All of a sudden, it's like I could barge into Beorn, he could spike the 5 or 6, or if I rolled a 1 or 2, the 3 or 4. And now I'm just losing on fight value. And all of a sudden, the Witch King could be in danger now. So understanding the order of sometimes maybe you don't do your guy's fight first, so the monster player doesn't have the perfect information of the fight values after the strikes. So the sequencing there really starts mattering with who strikes when, strike-offs happening, and the monster player, and who has priority. So if you don't have priority, maybe you're needing to call a combat, especially if it's a one-person here. Just it's not great value, but you hopefully kill the guy and then run away from the barge, because the barge can only go 6 inches, so as long as you are not in base contact with them, you will always be able to get out of their barge range. Because every hero, other than like goblins and dwarves, who only have 5 inches, they'll all have at least 6, so they'll get away. The dwarves and goblins, as long as you are an inch away from the other fight, you will then be more than 6 inches away and you'll be good there as well. So the next big thing to consider is how to hinder hurls. A hurl at the end of a combat is way less powerful than one at the beginning. You can't shut down a banner, as prone banners don't give out rerolls, so if the banner doesn't die and can't pass it off, it can't be the banner for the turn. So sometimes a monster player could be like, cool, started the fight phase, I'm going to hurl into your banner, can't get much out of it, I'm hoping to kill the hurled model and not kill the banner because there's a model he can pass off to, but it'll prone him and turn the banner off for the turn. So it's like a turn of a dead banner in a way. The other thing that it does is it can shut down heroes really well and make them also very vulnerable to even just a few dudes. A big hero that is charged for just guys looking to kill the front two, now all of a sudden can be in a must-win scenario when they're fighting those guys, because it could just all of a sudden be 8 dice all looking to wound them, and depending on the hero, that could be a fairly likely kill. Meaning that they might have to be spending might to win a fight they normally wouldn't want to. Not only are they having to spend the might to win the fight, they're just standing up, so they're not even killing your guys. They're spending a might that's effectively useless for them in a way. It's just free resource. But without priority, if the hurl into the hero is something that you are likely to face, you can call heroic combat again. Be like, this monster can likely hurl into me, I don't want to get hurled into right now, or I just need the fight to happen first. You got a big beater hero into their baby hero, and it's like, cool, I can hurl with my Witch King, hurl this guy into your guy, make him go prone, and now Beorn, this guy probably dies to the hurl. Beorn now is winning fighting the fight, unscared of losing it, and if he wins, probably just killing the support hero or even some combat heroes as well. So sometimes like I've got to call the combat here, so even if I lose the fight, I'm not trapped and I'm not just hopefully flash dying to that. So without priority, sometimes you're calling a defensive combat to avoid a hurl putting your hero prone in the fight they're fighting. Or if you are a strong combat hero, you can do it to kill the guys you're engaged with and then get away if you need to avoid the hurl entirely. So especially if you're like a free combat or like mighty hero with like Aragorn or Bard when he gets it in Survivors, like using that stuff to reposition away from hurls and stuff can be very important, since they can't hurl and combat in the same turn. So it can't just be like, oh, you called a combat, I'm going to call a combat. If it goes my way, I am just then going to hurl into you and do what I can with that. So keep in mind the idea of a hurl targeting a key hero maybe needs to combat defensively to avoid that killing them as easily. And then also, sometimes you just have to accept that, like, if you bring a hero on a horse, or you bring a mounted Boromir, like, if you're against a monster or enough monsters that are smart enough, like, he's probably eventually going to get hurled at. And he's probably going to keep getting hurled at. So it might just be a thing of, you know, it's fine. I'm just going to accept that I'm going to get hurled here, and I'm going to lose my horse. Or you could be like, I might get hurled here, very likely to. Maybe I dismount beforehand to save the knocked flying check. Because when you hurl into a cavalry model, the model, since they are knocked prone, automatically suffers knocked flying, so they will take the strength 6 hit plus a strength 3 hit. So you could be avoiding the extra hit from the cavalry knocked flying thing if you need to, which is something to be aware of with mounted heroes, that while they're mounted, if they get hurled, they'll get 3 hits on that first hurl, because 2 from being the hurled model and 1 for the knocked flying, and then they'll get 2 if they're the target. The third and second hit for each of those respective things are not as powerful, but can still all of a sudden put extra wounds on a hero that you weren't expecting. So that's kind of some basic strategies to play around the generic brutal power attacks, understanding that how they work and the power of priority versus not having it. And so there might be some situations where maybe you would want to give priority normally against a non-monster list, but giving them that utility might be like, even though I kind of want to give you priority in this situation for whatever reason, I need to take it just so I shut down your monster control during the fights. This next little bit is going to be focusing more on the open strategy and movement of how to play against monsters. It can be critical, especially against all monster lists or ones with multiple monsters. Last edition, the kind of thing you would do is like try and get 2 guys in, so that way you can spear support them. You'll roll 4 dice, and then that way, you know, even with the fight value, if you have a banner, especially if they don't, and you're rolling 5 dice so they're 3, you can have a pretty good chance to win the fight, and then you're getting 4 dice to try and win. But now this is kind of a liability a lot of the time. If you're not like trapping the model and actually putting a good threat of dice into them, if you just go in with the 2 models and spear support against it, and you don't have enough spear supports beyond like their number of attacks, you're just feeding them free value. So like if that monster, you charge them with 2, in this case, it's an eagle, got charged, only has 2 attacks, it wins the fight, and then it kills both of these Mirandans, all of a sudden it's getting 2 free attacks on the orcs, and it can have only 2 attacks and spontaneously get 4 kills. So charging these guys in can be better to have those extra dice in the fight, and especially if you can trap, because now you're rolling 4 dice, you can only kill 2 models, but you'll roll 4 dice, roll 8 to wound. Much better than, oh, I'm still only rolling 4 dice, I'll only roll 4 to wound, and then if he wins, he could potentially get 4 kills. So very important to understand that spear supporting against monsters, honestly, I don't think is the correct thing to do. I've played enough games this edition with monsters that every time someone spear supports against me, I am happy that they have done it, because I'm like, sure, they have so many more dice, but if I win it, it's just the potential for free kills. And all of a sudden that monster, like, I've had the trolls like get charged, win the fight, and they get 6 kills because they get 3 kills on the guys engaged, and all 3 things kill spear supports. Or even if it's just 5, like even just getting 1 or 2 extra kills, it's great. Or, you know, maybe you miss 1 or 2 wounds. Like the first one was a 1. Oh, okay, now the next 2 wounded, but then I got 1 or 2, so I still ended up getting 3 kills. It just ups the monster's consistency drastically. But obviously it ups your chance to win the fight more. So it's like, well, what do I do then? The shield strat. So shielding wise, if you can get 2 guys with shields in, just shield with them. Don't even bother supporting them. You'll still roll 4 dice. Sure, you won't kill the monster, you won't even wound it. No chance to. But 2 guys, especially even if they're Mirandans and they're like 10 points apiece, they shield and stop a monster, 20 point stopping, 100 point monster, 150 point monster, a 200 point monster, like whatever it is, if they are able to just spend their turn as 2 models shielding, bouncing it for a turn, that is so much better, in my opinion, than putting these 4 guys into it and potentially giving the extra 3rd and 4th kill. Because especially if they charged, now all of a sudden, 3 dice, doubling those to do the strikes, and then each of those that go through and kill can then go and then kill the spear support. 3 guys spear supported against like an eagle rolling 3 dice can win the fight, but if they lose, all of a sudden you're probably losing at least 4 models, sometimes more, probably 5 models, if the dice basically roll average, which is huge in terms of swing for the Eagles. Like, the Eagle player is going to be like, cool, sure, I lose the fight sometimes, but also now I'm just killing a good chunk of your force in one go. And especially if you're not like a horde army, like if you're not like basic orcs or like goblins, like 5-6 point models, if you're killing like 50 points of models in one turn with one monster, like that is huge value, just absolutely huge value. Getting 1, 2, maybe even 3 guys in shielding is the better call. But then once you start overwhelming a monster, an eagle that charges, sure, it's got 3 attacks, but if you can get to the point where like, cool, I've got 4 guys in base contact, so now they can only physically attack 3 of these, they don't have a 4th attack. As soon as that happens, now if you spear support everyone, minimizing the value they can get, because now they can kill the 3 and get to the point where they can get 3 potentially free extra attacks, but they can't get to these guys. So I think once you get that threshold of you are supporting more models than they are realistic to kill to get the free attacks, that's where it's worth it. So like a 3 attack model, probably 3 guys, you can kind of reliably do that, because in theory they should roll a 1 or 2 on one of the dice, not kill them, and then wound on the other 2, because they're going to wound almost all warriors on 3s, maybe 4s. If they're wounding on 4s, you should be able to get away with 3. If they're wounding on 3s, in theory, you should be able to get away with 3 with but like, once you get more models than attacks in, if you can support everything, that's where I think you can start going for it, and that's where you're like committing to the kill at that point. You are no longer saying, I'm trying to stall it, I'm trying to slow it down, I'm committing to removing this monster from the board. Maybe not in one turn, but I'm trying to put it into a situation where as you flub your rolls now, I'm going to start taking wounds and threaten it throughout the course of the game now. This is also like way easier with things with high courage. Like elves, you can probably get 6 or 7 guys in on the eagle, 2-hand with all the ones in the front, and then just basically say, I'm going to kill you in one turn if you don't roll the 6. Sure, you might kill, and even at that point, you might not even need to spear support at all. Like if you're able to get in with either like a fearless bubble, like Minas Morgul, if your orcs don't have to courage check, don't even give them any spear support hits. Just get everybody in, be like, I'm going to roll 8 dice, and you're not getting any extra kills. You only do the support stuff. Average or poor courage, and maybe like orcs, you spike your courage rolls for a turn and get 4 or 5 guys in, and then you're like, I really need to try and leverage this and hope they fluff and put the other bodies in as well for the spear supports. Because you'll typically have the bodies as more of a horde size, versus something like elves where their numbers are going to, like, if you lose 6 elves in a turn, that's 60 points. That's not a good place to be, and you're going to lose pretty quickly in that case. So definitely just depends on the courage stuff, but I think the rule of thumb is if you aren't threatening to kill with like +1 to wounds and stuff like that, and basically like are very likely to flash kill it if they fluff, you should be trying to stall it and minimize its damage, whether through shielding or not supporting your models. This also goes for like against like an all monster army, you can kind of spread out and keep your guys spaced, but against an army that maybe has a battle line, it can be a little bit more concerning of like, well, I really would like to have a normal battle line present with them having a battle line to contest mine. So you'd be like, well, they've got an eagle with a front line of dwarves, maybe from Battle 5 armies or something. So it's like, I don't want to just spread out, because then my battle line will just get melted by theirs, versus against a monster army not worrying about it. So against all monsters, I would just basically not even put your models, if you have priority and have to move first, I would potentially not even leave my guys spear supporting. So that way, if they do come in, they're not getting the spear support kills. Sure, you're not as likely to win the fight, but then they're not getting the freebies. It also will help against bard strategies, where sure, they can come in, they can say, cool, I'm going to fight these guys. Like, I can fight these 2 here. Barging, they can't really go anywhere if you have like this guy locked up, or even just with him. So you can be like, cool, I'm going to make these 2 make what back up into these guys and then go back into them to get the spear support kills as a monster, but it can be very tough to do that with control zones and spacing and stuff like that. So by doing this, you have made it to where they can't do the free support kills. Now, if you don't have priority and they move forward first, you can your guys could be in spear supports, and then after they move, they can be like, cool, we charge here, and you can just be like, these guys aren't going to do anything this turn. Maybe they try and charge, or at the very least, they just back off and say, cool, we're content just not spear supporting, and we'll see how this first fight goes. is something that you can very easily do, especially against all monster lists, minimizing their charge turns, where they're very likely when they win the fight to get kills on every model on the front and therefore get free spear support hits. Don't give them that. You need to weather the storm until they can lose the priorities, and then you start getting into them and then threatening them with their losing the dice rolls and being trapped. Why here there would be even a worse example, but like a Great Eagle comes in, sure, you're rolling 4 dice, but if you don't spike the 6, and even when you do, 30% of the time they will too, but if you don't hit the 6 with the 4 dice, like, they're probably just going to kill the front 2 and then get one of the 2 in the back, if not both of them. And then the other thing that a battle line does, especially against a lot of monsters or an all monster list, is the way how normally when you lose a fight, you have to back up your guys that were engaged, which includes making away with 1 model, right? So they could back up an inch and these guys could back up an inch. And so if that happens, that would be what normally happens. But now if you have them together, the monster controls the movement of the models, and it forces both the models engaged and the spear supports to make way. So what that means is, instead of just bumping these guys and these guys making way, these guys on a barge are all going to have to make way, or going to have to back away 3 inches. And what that means is, if you had like the banner here, it would then have to be, or not necessarily have to, they could choose whether it does or choose how it does to make way as well. So these guys are engaged, this banner's here, these guys will need to back up, they want to back them up this way, they're going to make the banner make way this way, and then these guys all come back here. It could make it to where, like, now the banner's displaced, it's on its own, that kind of thing, where if they are not engaged and the spear supports are just behind, and it can be a millimeter really, if you could just say, hey, these guys are not in spear support, and you're being very, very careful with it, and you're like, they are not spear supporting, and you just leave that little bit. Just by doing that, now if they barge, these are the makeways. So the banner here can't be affected, because the only way to get to the banner is to move these guys, which have to be the makeway for the engaged models since they weren't supporting. So not supporting the front line means the barge can only affect the front line and then the models that make way. Whereas if they support, they can affect the entire 2-line battle line plus a 3rd line of troops. So if for some reason, like if maybe you had all your archers in the back here too, because you're trying to wall off from the banner or a specific hero, these guys are engaged with support, these guys are engaged, these guys are supporting, they can clear out basically this entire column in 1 barge, and in theory could potentially even get to the banner in this case, because they could say, cool, this guy is going to make way, or is going to back away 3 inches, this guy's going to back away 3 inches this way, which is going to necessitate this guy moving because of bases, so he's going to make way as well, and then this guy's going to do the same thing going through this dude, so these guys are going to come back 3 inches this way, so he's going to have to follow him as well, and then this specter is going to come 3 inches this way, and depending on the banner placement, they could potentially get into the banner all of a sudden because of that. So, or the hero or anything like that. So preventing them from being able to back up that 3rd line with the makeways and making the normal makeways happen in a way, quote unquote normal, is a huge deal as well. So against a list with multiple monsters and a battle line, you have to understand the texture of the match and when your battle line needs to be formed against theirs and when you need to break it up against the monsters, versus all monsters understand that, like, you really don't even want the battle line, just kind of like space your guys out, don't leave gaps for the monster to get through, but like especially like against monsters, their bases are huge, so you can make the space for a cavalry model, so like the Eagle can charge both of these, and now all of a sudden your hero on a horse can come in here, your hero on foot can come in, and you can make the gap even smaller to where it's just like, cool, I can fit an infantry model through here, he can fit there, but he's gonna be my hero. Oh, sure, so you can charge, but now my hero can do whatever he wants. He can go into an eagle if he wants to, he can chill, he can reposition. You have that flexibility of base size to allow that. So spacing out your formations and making it as difficult as possible to give the monsters as few free attacks from the supporting strikes and as few barges that impact as many models, and minimizing that is a huge deal. And then this is kind of like with dealing with a monster, especially like big monsters like the Balrog. This also includes like war beasts, troll brutes, especially Mumax. This can be a decision you make in list building. It can be a decision you make at the table based on the matchup and the texture of the board. Those are all both going to go into it. But you should, before any dice are rolled, for the most part, have an idea of what you are doing to deal with their monster. And it pretty much should boil down to avoiding or killing. You're either going to try and minimize its impact by just not letting it get value, by running away, angling things, using terrain, whatever you can to minimize its impact, or you're like, I'm going to kill it. As soon as I can, I'm going to engage with it. I'm going to spend everything I have trying to bring it down. Whichever one you choose at the beginning is the one you should stick with. So if you plan on killing it, you throw everything you can to do so, and you don't stop. Even if things don't go as well the first few turns, you just have to keep going at it. If you're planning to avoid it the entire game, even if things all of a sudden look like maybe I can engage with it now, typically you're better off still avoiding it if that's what you were doing. Changing it mid-game can easily lead to a loss when a win was likely or more likely. There will be times when the change in the plan might be necessary, but understanding that this is the minority of the circumstances and not the typical preferred outcome is important to know. It's going to be the exception, not the rule, that changing your game plan mid will be more beneficial. It's also going to be a good rule outside of monsters with like large, big beater heroes and things like that. Like making your game plan against like a skew army of any kind and sticking to it is important. And this will give you more cards than goats over time if you do that. There will obviously be situations where maybe you need to switch it out of necessity because the other plan backfired too horribly and it's a Hail Mary at this point. Or like things have just textured out in a way weirdly to where it necessitates it. But I am fully in the camp that typically make your plan at the start, execute said plan, and don't worry about switching it up even if things maybe don't go perfect right away at the beginning, but understanding that things can and will go wrong and not letting that completely dissuade you from the plan that you chose, because chances are it's not even the end of the world. And also it's a dice game. Sometimes your plan just doesn't work, right? Because the dice are against you. So hopefully some of these ideas are a good starting point as baselines to play against monsters. If there's anything that you guys can think of that are a big thing that I missed for like basic things that are pretty universal, that is good. And then potentially, depending on information from that, if people would like one diving deeper into specific how to deal with monsters, that could be looked into. But I think that understanding the benefits of the new monsters to the old edition and the strategies, how some are similar, like the shielding versus spear supporting now, is really not a good idea. So hopefully this gives a good baseline for people. If you got something out of it, please let me know. If I missed something that you think is crucial people should know, or that you have found has worked, please let me know that as well in the comments. Otherwise, I think that'll be the end for the video, and I appreciate you guys taking your time, and have a good rest of your day.